This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. TalkCatholic.com with Tim Kilcoyne, and I always like to share some of my homework with you as I was looking through a wonderful collection of movies called The Bible Collection. It was put out in the late 1990s. I don't think there is any better depiction and portrayal of our scriptures, Old Testament and New. Check it out if you can, somewhere on the internet, if you can pick them up. They are so well done. In any event, I was looking at 1 and 2 Samuel in the Old Testament, the monarchies of Israel under Saul and David. And I think it's maybe interesting to point out, during the times especially in which we're living, it wasn't always that the state didn't listen to the church's authority. Under Old Testament monarchies, you would have the church prophet, such as Samuel, giving advice to the king, Saul. And that advice was a direct line understood by the king to God. And the most important thing that the king could do was to listen to the moral advice of the religious seer. And needless to say, they were disobedient often. And in the case of Saul, he lost the blessing of God because he didn't go according to the word of Samuel very specifically in a battle against the Amalekites. And he actually went a little bit insane when he realized that God was no longer over him through Samuel. And Samuel, disgusted, gave the blessing to David. And David was most faithful, even though David was not any paragon of virtue in all matters, especially sexual. He at least had 3 wives and many problems within the family because of it. And yet, he showed mercy upon his enemies. He prayed for them. Many of the Psalms are attributed to King David. And he was generally faithful to his people in abiding by those commandments for them. Again, it didn't mean that he was perfect himself in upholding them. He had a real faith. His prayer life was constant, and a great reverence and respect for the Ark of the Covenant that contained the tablets of the law. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, hypocrisy, yes, but faithful to the covenant with God and his people. Yes, the Israelites were sinners, real hypocrites at times, moving away from those commandments. And yet, they never lost God from their gaze. And as Professor Kreft said in his book, How to Destroy Western Civilization, all healthy cultures have believed in the natural moral law. Ours is the first whose mind molders, both official and unofficial, the media, do not. We are certainly doomed to extinction unless this is reversed, because there is simply no alternative. When God takes control, he is like a traffic cop at the busy city corner. He directs all the traffic aright, cars and pedestrians. Without him, everyone goes where he wills, that is, in every possible different direction. There are chaos and collisions and crashes. Men without God are like ships without rudders, subject to every shift of wind and tide, fads and fashions, pressures and influences. Drifters. Putting God second is like putting the top button of your coat into the second buttonhole. It throws off all the others. When subjective reality does not conform to objective reality, nothing comes out right. Sanctity is sanctity. The meaning of life is to become like the Mississippi River. All the other hundreds and thousands of little and medium-sized rivers flow into it, and it unifies them all and takes all their waters to the ocean. Physical gravity moves all matter to unity, especially heavy matter like water. There is a spiritual gravity too, a God gravity. And there is one and only one magnet pulling all that is good, and that is God. When we sin, we are insane. We choose misery over joy, and we know it. We know that in sin, it leads to misery by repeated, consistent experience. We are not rational. We are addicts. sinaholics. The alcoholic knows very clearly that he is ruining his life and his happiness, and he does it anyway. So does the sinaholic. This is how insane we are. Here is a choice. On this side, joy. On that side, misery. Now, which will you choose? Oh, let's see now. I'm not quite sure. That's insanity. We are spiritually insane. That is what original sin means. God is a jealous God because there is only one of him. He will not share his glory with another because there is no other. And Jesus is God incarnate. We should see Christ, our commander, always because he is present always, and we should spiritually salute him 50 times a day until love and obedience become one. We feel more comfortable putting Christ in a bottle, like a genie or medicine, and using him only when we feel it's necessary. If our prayers honestly spoke our hearts, they would say something like this: Lord, please bless me a bit over here and over there. Please tidy up the parts of my life that I do not like, but nothing more, please. That will do for now. Thank you very much. You are dismissed. You may go now. There is only one way to avoid this insanity, which stands in the way of our being saints, stands in the way of our attaining the meaning of our lives. And that way is what the world calls fanaticism, and what Muslims call surrender, and what Jesus calls obeying the first and greatest commandment. So, in order to not go insane like Saul and many of us that Professor Kreft is referring to by choosing misery over the fundamental option called joy, well, we have to seek out God's wisdom. We have to be a people of wisdom collectively, as a nation, as a family. Wisdom is very different than simply being intelligent. There's a lot of smart people, and they probably do most of the damage in the world historically. The bright lights that think they know better for all of us. It's been an age-old saga through human history. It's called dictatorship. But Joe and Josephine usually are the people that God chooses out to not only live great lives, but to speak his wisdom, often quietly, perhaps obscurely, but most definitely. And by the way, they are always in the majority. And we have to find those corners, those little nooks in the desert where we can hear the still small voice in our life. It is all about truth and not about lies. And so I offer from the book Your Life in the Holy Spirit by Professor Alan Schreck a few words about where truth and wisdom really do come from. Pentecost was not just a flash in the pan, he says. It was no temporary phenomenon that launched the church, captivated its members for a few short weeks or years, and then departed. Jesus did not give the Holy Spirit to the church and to each local church or parish only for a time. The Spirit was not leased to the church. He is a permanent gift. Nor did Jesus give the fullness of the Holy Spirit to the church at Pentecost and a weakened, watered-down portion of the Spirit to the later church. Pentecost was the beginning, but the power, gift, fruits, and grace of the Holy Spirit are fully available to the church today. They are here for the asking. Pentecost is significant, not just a historical event. The Holy Spirit, first poured out at Pentecost, continues to shine forth in the church despite its struggles, sin, and weakness. All the more reason why the church needs the strength and guidance of the Spirit in every age, since every age is a time of struggle and conflict until the Lord returns. The fullness of truth that leads to salvation has been entrusted to the church and particularly to its leaders by the Holy Spirit. Defending the truth demands courage and will entail suffering. In the letters to Timothy, a time was foreseen. There will be debate and considerable confusion about truth. The Spirit expressly says that in the later times, some will depart from the faith by giving heed to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. Timothy is urged to constancy, preach the word, be urgent in season and out of season, convince, rebuke, and exhort, be unfailing in patience and in teaching, for the time is coming that will not endure sound doctrine. These prophecies do not necessarily refer only to the end time, but rather to times like our own, all those times when false teachings undermine the faith and people depart from sound doctrine to turn to teachers who suit them. So the first line of truth is to come from the church through the apostolic succession of her leaders, the Pope, cardinals, bishops, priests, deacons, sisters and nuns, brothers, lay religious educators like myself, be it on TV, radio, or in your local parish hall, any religious educator that's involved in catechesis, we in particular are under the obligation to the Holy Spirit to impart His truth. And we have that mandate from the Lord Himself at Pentecost through the Holy Spirit. Nothing has changed. And this is why it is always up to the church's leadership to speak and speak well to the culture at large in whatever era they find themselves, because we are responsible and we are the first carriers of God's true wisdom to the world. And it's a pretty heavy obligation, and to whom much is given, more is expected. But what happens when that voice is muffled, stymied, just absolutely blockaded from being heard, as it is today? Certainly the media doesn't want to hear it. Government doesn't want to hear it. Not to forget labor management, business, nor the gurus in our educational system at large, especially public. These are the very four spheres of influence that Father James Keller of the Christopher movement back in 1948 was imploring the faithful and good American citizens in general to invade and to sanctify with God's truth and wisdom. And I turn back to his wonderful book, You Can Change the World. As I said, this is all about truth versus lies. And we're going to expose the lies that are in those four domains of influence. He says, regarding education first, it is that education in America right now is going through the same process of despiritualization which took place in Germany, and more than anything else, paved the way for Hitler. It is the despiritualization that the followers of Karl Marx work unceasingly to achieve in every country that their poisons can reach. It is the process that has one fixed objective: to condition youth to the idea that they are animals, nothing more. The Christian concept of the dignity of man as he is in the image and likeness of God must be forever banished. For love of God and the love of man for his neighbor, he would substitute the gospel of hate. What Hitler knew, and Stalin, but which far too many good people do not yet realize, is that if there is no morality, there can be no law other than that of force. Modern education rejects and excludes from the curriculum of necessary studies the whole religious tradition of the West. There is no common faith, no common moral and intellectual discipline. When one realizes that they, the graduates of our schools, have no common culture, is it astounding that they have no common purpose, that they worship false gods. They are tearing Western society to pieces. They are the graduates of an educational system in which, though attendance is compulsory, the choice of the subject matter of education is left to the imagination of college presidents, trustees, and professors, or even to the whims of the pupils themselves. We have an educational system in which we insist that while everyone must be educated, there is nothing in particular that an educated man or woman must know. The end of learning, John Milton wrote, is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright, and out of that knowledge to love him, to imitate him, to be like him, as we may, the nearest by possessing our souls of true virtue, which being united to heavenly grace of faith, makes up the highest perfection. Education, good education, must point out, teach, and emphasize most convincingly that man shall not live by bread alone. For what doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his own soul? Education must stress one fundamental fact which alone makes social living possible. Man must be educated for his ultimate goal in life, the end for which he was created, to know, love, and serve God, and to be happy with him in the life to come. Education must stand for liberty, to exercise the rights God has given us, otherwise it will yield to tyranny. When we come back, I will expose what education is not from a book called Get Out Now by Mary Rice Hasson and Teresa Farnan, a most ear-opening indictment of our public school system where the lies abound. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. Okay, so let's make Father Keller proud and dive right into a primary sphere of influence, where power is, no doubt, but also a pack of lies. I read from the appendix of this book, Get Out Now, copyright 2018, again by Mary Rice Hassan and Teresa Farnan. The first lie: why should I worry about this? I went to public school and I'm fine. My kids will be too. They respond: if you're like most Americans, you attended public schools, you emerged with a strong connection to the community, received a good education, and made lifelong friends who shared your values and faith. But times have changed. The progressive left has turned your public school system into a cultural battleground. Is it still possible to emerge from public school with your values, faith, and morals intact? Yes, it's possible. But the most important question is it likely? Parents who keep their kids in public schools are subjecting them to unrelenting indoctrination. It's hard enough to be the only adult in the room who believes in God. It's much harder to be the only teenager. It's crucial to realize how much has changed. We've documented the increasing alignment of public school curricula with the values of the progressive left, the hostility to parents, and the shift away from local control, with the federal government, unions, and activists setting the agenda. Gender ideology's conquest of the public schools makes it impossible to deny that the education, quote-unquote, provided by the state is, in fact, indoctrination. Even if your child is mature enough to recognize indoctrination and resist it, you must still consider what he is missing in his education. Your son or daughter has only one childhood. Hours spent not studying the heroes of American history or marinating in practical atheism are years not spent receiving a rich formation in virtue. Remember the question posed by a hypothetical parent at the beginning: why should I worry about this? I went to public school, I'm fine. Well, just remember, ladies and gentlemen, most of you that are over 50 for sure, remember a public school, grammar school education anyway, where there was at least the Pledge of Allegiance to start the school day, to honor the flag, if not a prayer, depending on the teacher. This was certainly my experience in the first few grades of a public school, and then I went off to a Catholic grammar school where the Sisters of the Presentation started the school day off always with a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. To think that that didn't have any influence on the formation of my virtue and character would be completely naive. In fact, as a high school teacher myself, if you didn't start the classroom off with the prayer, watch out. You were setting the tone for possible anarchy. That simple 1 to 2 minute prayer to start that class off was absolutely critical, and I think anybody who actually taught in a Catholic school of any kind would attest to the same, because you were getting the kids in touch with their true selves, their godly selves, that spark of identity that wants to believe, as opposed to its opposite, which is now the case almost everywhere in the public sector. Prayer has been out of the public schools since 1963. You reap what you sow. There is a difference. Whether they want to tell you that is a whole different ballgame for sure. They won't give you any stats on the changing environment of education in the classroom with prayer versus without. I believe it was Frank Sheed, the great Catholic evangelist of old, that posed the question: ask the state to give a definition of education. They won't be able to. And this echoes what Rod Dreher just said in Live Not by Lies, that these people are not really educators, but rather name callers. They try to intimidate by insinuating that you have all these hang-ups about groups of people, as opposed to teaching the children United States history, mathematics, English grammar, and other things that can help uplift yourself in the world at a later time at least, irregardless of sex, race, etc. No, that's just a little too heady, a little too cerebral. The teachers will have to do their homework and get up to snuff on the basics. Do not forget the analogy of the bully in the schoolyard, ladies and gentlemen. What is it that they resort to? Name calling. It's all they got. But it never works in the end. Let us go on. The hypothetical adult now says, I can't shelter my kids from the world, so shouldn't I let their light shine? The authors respond, no one wants to shelter his children if that means keeping them cooped up and unable to explore. Children should be able to stretch, grow, and explore in an environment that respects and supports their family's faith and values. As they mature, they will gain the strength and wisdom to hold on to their values in college and at work and to help their peers do the same. That said, the impulse to shelter children is perfectly normal. Most parents try to shield their children from the darker side of the internet, for example. But it makes no sense to shield your children from harmful messages online and then expose them to the same messages in school simply because those messages have been attractively packaged and bear the government's seal of approval. The question is not whether our kids will be exposed to this or that depravity, but when and how and in what context. Are you prepared to trust the school's judgment on when Junior is ready to learn about concepts like transgenderism? Do you trust their judgment on how he learns about it and what he's told about it? Opting out of the public schools is not getting into a defensive crouch. If the purpose of education is to give your children the moral and intellectual tools to navigate adulthood, why would you expose them prematurely to adult problems in a system that fails to equip them with the spiritual, moral, and emotional tools they need for life's journey? Well said. And Professor Kraft already said it even better in his book, How to Destroy Western Civilization. He says, it's not that we seek to impose our sexual morality on others by force. We propose. We do not impose. We seek only liberty of conscience for everyone, including ourselves. But they seek to impose their sexual morality on us. They do not merely propose, they impose. They want to force us to compromise our consciences or be punished by a fine or something worse. Why? We can tolerate them. Why can't they tolerate us? Because they know it is not a minority view. This is the majority view in all times and places outside 21st century Europe and North America, and the view of all the great religions of the world. He then goes on in chapter 5 of this book to expose the quote-unquote logic of liberalism, which could be said to undergird our public school system, and I'll just give you a few of the many illogics that he lays bare. Number 1, today's ideas are truer than yesterday's ideas. Of course, they will be yesterday's ideas tomorrow. Forbidding things is forbidden. You shouldn't ever say shouldn't. You may worship any god but God. The hell with hell. People who believe in damnation should be damned. The idea that some ideas are damnable ideas is a damnable idea. There is no truth, and that's the truth. Absolutely no absolutes. Censorship should be censored. I can't tolerate any intolerance. We must be very religious about having no religion. The government knows best unless it's a government elected by people who don't vote for people like us. Don't be negative. All men are equal except those who think some are superior. Abolish capital punishment. Capital punishment kills killers. But abortion is okay because that kills only the innocent. Everyone is prejudiced except us. There is no meaning of life, and that's the meaning of life. He is magnificent, the great, yet humble, Professor Peter Kreeft from Boston College of philosophy fame. And he would agree with the biblical constant theme, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We will be faithful right here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. We'll see you next week, everyone. God bless you. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.